Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. Glad to have you back with us for episode, what are we at, 41 now?
41.
Yes, and in coronavirus years, that's got to be like, I don't know, 1 million episodes? Something like that?
I think it is. Yep.
I think that's fair to say, for sure.
Round up.
For sure. So today we got a really interesting topic for you. We want to talk about, there's just a lot of research out there right now. Lots of studies that are about COVID-19 and about the health effects of COVID-19 and this and that and the other thing. But what we wanted to do today in this episode is to break down just a handful of specific studies and the implications that these studies have for churches. So I think, all of these have church-specific data. That'd be a way to say it, right?
Sure.
And then they've got some other pieces of data that we can sort of extrapolate out and apply to churches. Would that be fair to say as well?
That is fair to say as well. None of it should be taken to the bank.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like maybe some useful information that would be helpful in planning. That's kind of what we wanted to bring to you. Much like the way we might count episodes, somewhere between 41 and 1 million. That's kind of how a lot of the
wow, AJ
is.
Oh man, way to really sell this episode, AJ. I'm sure people are like, oh wait. But to your point, I mean, what is the saying? There's lies, darned lies, and statistics, and so you should take all of this with just a slight grain of salt. That being said, and AJ and I were talking about this before we went on air, that there's things that we can learn from this. So even if you don't take it fully seriously, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take it seriously at all. Or just because it doesn't fully apply to you in your context doesn't mean there isn't a nugget of truth and information that you can take from this. And that is our goal for you today, is to give you really relevant, practical, pragmatic information from these studies that you can apply and learn from. And again, I'm naturally skeptical too. I know AJ is too. I think that's all well and good and well deserved at this point. But that should not make us jaded, right? We should be looking to find and learn what we can learn from bits and pieces.
Yeah, and this stuff today, we're not debating the science of whether masks are helpful or not. None of that. No. We're just talking about preparing for reopening your church.
That's right.
And there's some information here that maybe will help your leadership team say, okay, well, here's something maybe that we hadn't thought of, and let's just keep this in mind as we head into the summer and the fall.
Well said. So there's 3 studies that we're going to look at, and sort of 3 insights that we're going to derive from these 3 different studies. And so we're just going to dive straight into that. Does that work for you?
Let's do it. Yep.
Okay. So the first one that we want to point out is that you should anticipate relatively low attendance on your first Sunday back. So if you've already had your first Sunday back, you probably have already experienced this. And again, that's probably also something that you might already have assumed was going to be true. But it might be even lower than you think. And that's what this study shows us. So if I can hit the right buttons here, I'll show you this data. AJ, this data comes from Jackson County, Missouri. Hat tip to Ryan Wakefield, actually. He posted this in his church marketers group, and I think this was maybe the most actionable, interesting piece of data that I maybe had come across in a long time. I thought, wow, this is very insightful. So Jackson County, Missouri is Kansas City area, and so it's middle America, right, AJ? I mean, I call it. And so it may not be culturally just like where you live, but it's probably similar. So the attitudes are at least interesting to look at. So what we found in this study, or what they found in the study, I should say, is that when we click over to worship, place of worship, there is 23% of folks say they're not going to come back to church until there's a vaccine, or at least that's what they self-reported. 32% feel safe right now, and 44.62%, 45% or so, have mixed feelings. That they're probably gonna come back, but they may not be there that first Sunday. And so the takeaway here that we want to point out is that 30%, AJ, that's the group you can probably count on to be there on your first Sunday.
Most likely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if that extrapolates out to your church, you can think whatever you had pre-COVID, plan on about 30% showing up on Sunday number 1.
Right. And sort of the opposite of that, the folks in the I'm not leaving my house until there's a vaccine, approaching near 25%, they're definitely not going to be there.
Right.
So you're probably on the high side, 70-ish% attendance, and on the low side, probably around 30 or so.
That's right.
And I think we've seen anecdotal, evidence that we've seen as we're tracking with churches that we're in contact with and that others that we're talking with are well below 70% attendance for at least this first few weeks. I mean, we're only a few weeks into some partial reopenings.
Yeah.
And I think probably one of the bigger takeaways here, I've talked with several pastors that they're anticipating, we normally have one service, but we're going to do 3 services or 4 services or, just making some fairly radical changes to their Sunday morning planning. And probably you're going to find, at least for the first few weeks, that was unnecessary because you just probably don't need to plan. You don't need to make a place for 100% of your congregation because we're seeing that they're 100% are not coming back. Not right now, at least.
Right. One other thing I want to point out from this, let me click back here and show it to you. And we're going to talk more about this vaccine group here in just a minute. But let's just click on the feel safe to come back right now. When you click on that, you can see this data shift up here. The people who feel good about going back to worship, they feel good about going anywhere. I mean, they'll go to an airport. They'll even hop on a bus for the most part, right? They're going to go to work. They'd go to a bar. This is Kansas City, right? So they'd go catch a Chiefs game. They would go anywhere and do anything. And conversely, that vaccine group, they don't feel comfortable going anywhere. You'll see, yep, okay, so now this is all shifted. So that they don't, church got the lowest possible score, but they don't want to go anywhere. They're not going to go to a Chiefs game. They might go to work. They might go hang out outside, but they're not going to do much of anything else. It's this other group, the ones that have mixed feelings, that they're interesting. So church is not number 1 for them, and they're coming back. It got a 2.5 out of 5. So if you're not watching this episode, you're listening to it. It could score as low as 1.1 or I guess as high as 5 point or 4.8 or 5.1 or something like that, 5.0. Nothing got that high. Nothing got a 5, but church got a 2.5. So again, if you're not watching this and you're just listening, people in this mixed feelings group felt on the low end is getting on a bus. They're not going to get on a bus, understandably. On the high end is going outside, 3.8, understandably. And church is right there in the middle, 2.5. So it's not the first place they're going to go, but it's not the last place they're going to go either. And I think there's some good insight there. Just as you start to make your plans, I think it's wise to say you should make your plans, AJ, for that 75% of people who will make their way back eventually, even if it's not Sunday number 1. So you might not need that second service or that additional service time week 1, but you might need it week 3, 4, or 5.
Yeah.
Another factor that I'm hearing from churches that's impacting this, AJ, is the availability of children's ministry. So a lot of churches are opening up without children's ministry at first, and they're just thinking, if I'm going to have to wrangle my kids somewhere, I'd rather do that in the living room than in the worship center. So that's a contributing factor. It's not just a safety concern. There's also that practicality of if there's not children's ministry, like I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't think I'm going to be there.
Yeah, and then there's the elderly population variable in here as well. So depending on, how large of a demographic that is in your church, that's going to be another group of people that, likely won't be back right away
Yeah.
probably shouldn't be back right away. I know some churches are doing like a seniors only service.
Right, so that they can all infect each other. It's great.
I think there's kind of two ways of looking at that, right, Scott? You know, I mean, there's
it's like a nursing home situation, right? Like, let's put them all together.
From others, but on the other hand, if there's something there that infects, then maybe they all get it. So, of course, the rate of infection doesn't vary by age. I mean, everybody has the same chance of exposure. If it's there, it's just what happens to you if you get it. So,
well, another factor to consider too, AJ, and we all know this, right? That sometimes those who are most vulnerable are the ones who are most likely to show up. The doors are open; they want to be there.
That's true.
And so that's a factor you just got to keep
committed.
Yeah. So we show you that because I felt like that Kansas City is got to be at least fairly representative of the attitude. It's a good mix between conservatives and liberals in a place like Kansas City, and their total sample size was like 9,500 people who took that survey. So that's got to be fairly representative. And anecdotally, with the churches that we've talked to in our church leader huddles, the ones that we've seen just on Facebook sort of reporting what happened their first week back, it seems to be pretty consistent. That there's about 30% of whatever your pre-COVID attendance was. That was Sunday 1. Now that may continue to go up, but at least in their initial opening, it was 30%. So the first insight that we want to give you is plan on, if you had dreams of having 60% or 70% of your folks back or more, or you were just going to blow the doors open your first Sunday back, you should temper those expectations, I think would be fair to say.
Yeah. Don't be disappointed.
Please do not be disappointed. All right, AJ, what's number 2 for us?
Let me click back over there, Scott, so I can get to it. Expect that some people might not come back. I hate saying at all, but at least for maybe quite a bit of time. So, yeah. This is our second study here that was put together by, let me find it.
The Center for Bible Engagement,
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they found, I guess, kind of the bottom line on this one that we're kind of bringing to you today. They're predicting that churches could see a 25 to 35% decrease in attendance of regular attenders.
Right.
And we don't have a lot of detail or caveats on, over a particular period of time or under what conditions. So, but this is just another one of those things maybe to keep in your mind that even, as the summer continues to go on and, hopefully we don't see any major relapse of cases or anything that gets really bad again, you probably are. Again, this kind of fits in, right, Scott, with maybe that group that is vaccine only. Mm-hmm. And maybe we're going to max out in that 75% area of what you used to see on your attendance for the foreseeable future.
Right. Forever is a long time. But it's worth noting, and this is what this study shows us, because this study is basically, even though it was completely independent, obviously, of the Jackson County, Missouri study, it essentially validates the Jackson County, Missouri study because its conclusions are similar. However, one factor that we have to consider is how much people like watching church online, which is another thing that they kind of looked at, right? People like the convenience of it, that it's still local, that they essentially can watch church on demand. And these are the things that they miss are fellowship and, sacraments together, serving together, hugging people. They miss those things, but there's a certain population that maybe doesn't care that much about that. Is that cruel or mean to say or unfair to say?
Well, no. I mean, there's all kinds of people, and certainly there's some that they attend church for different reasons.
Sure.
And the fellowship is just not a big aspect for them. And so, which, obviously is what we're missing out on in online church. And so if that's not a huge concern for them and they don't feel a need for that, then maybe, the online it's a dream come true.
Right. Yeah. It's an introvert's dream come true. Not to pick on introverts, but, there's probably going to be a certain segment of the population that just doesn't want to come back for a variety of reasons. That they got used to church online and they like it. They got used to groups online and they like it. I mean, we're not just talking about online church in regards to the worship services, but online church in regards to groups. And if your church doesn't offer those, those folks might transfer to a church that does have online groups moving forward, and so they can continue to engage in that way. So, so the first conclusion from the first study is your initial attendance back is going to be low. The second conclusion that we're drawing here, AJ, is that there may be some long-term implications. Now, over time, you might reach a whole new subset of people who are part of that 66% or 70% who feel comfortable going places, and your overall net number is higher than what it was pre-COVID. But the group that's there in person might not include certain people who were there pre-COVID. I think
and we can't.
Point I want to make.
We also can't conclude from this second study that those folks that don't want to return in person are abandoning any church or your church.
Right.
It could be that they remain faithfully watching online. Maybe their generosity is not changing. Their giving is the same. It just could be that they're just going to take in church in a different way for the foreseeable future. So, yeah. And of course, we still have the opportunity, as you're saying, Scott, to grow our churches just like we were trying to do before. So
that's right.
You might, maybe if you were bumping up against a capacity issue, could be a blessing. Half of your people or a third are going to watch from home, and you got room for,
room to grow.
Or 100 people. So
that's right. That's right. Okay, so the first two are about attendance related. One, temper your expectations for your first week back. Second, recognize that there may be some folks that, they might continue to be part of your church, but only online, at least for this foreseeable future. And don't take that as a personal attack that has nothing to do with you. The third study that we want to show you is a little bit, I don't know, scary?
Yeah.
A cautionary tale? Is that maybe what we want to call it? A cautionary tale? Yes.
And this one, unfortunately, it leaves more questions than answers. We were talking about this before we went live, Scott, but it's still, the takeaway, remains the same. We've got to be careful. We've got to do what we can to protect our people, to the best of our ability. We need to use wisdom and not foolishness. But yeah, so our third thing here is from the CDC website, and it's highlighting a church in Arkansas that had a few people attend. When was this, Scott?
It was in March. So this was, to be
early.
fair to this church, no one was taking it very seriously at this point. So I don't know who this church is, and I don't want to knock them.
Okay.
But it's certainly, it was early. The point that we want to make, though, AJ, is that you should prepare for an outbreak at your church.
Right.
That's the insight. It might never happen, but you should not assume that it could never happen, is what we want to. This is what this shows us. So let's just walk through the case study here from the CDC. 2 symptomatic people attended church events March 6th through 8th that later tested positive for COVID-19. So let's stop there for just a minute. Number one, they didn't know that they had COVID-19. And it was March 6th through 8th when no one knew that it was how important this stuff was. But it's worth mentioning that they were symptomatic. So that symptomatic people are more contagious than folks who are asymptomatic. Asymptomatic people can still spread, but to a lesser degree than the people who are symptomatic, or at least that everything I've ever read suggests that symptomatic people are certainly more contagious than asymptomatic people.
They're coughing.
That's right. Right. That's right. Yeah. They're doing the things that spread the virus more. So, and they would probably have a higher viral load at that point, I would think.
Probably. Yeah.
So, hopefully you can avoid this entire situation by just making sure that there's no symptomatic people at your church, but you can't control people, AJ. You don't know. You don't know. You can ask, but you can't know. So here's what happens. So these 2 people show up. At least 35 of the 92 attendees acquired COVID-19, And out of that 35, 3 died. So if we just do some rough rounding here and call that 100 people, 35 out of 100. So 35% of the church, essentially more than a third, end up contracting COVID-19, and 3% of that congregation died as a result of 2 people showing up with COVID-19. And then as you can see here, from contact with these church cases, at least 26 additional cases were confirmed and 1 death not related to the church but connected to those, infected through those church cases. That's devastating. 4 people dying as a result of 2 symptomatic people going to church. I don't say this because I'm trying to fearmonger or say that your church shouldn't get back together. Far from it. I'm showing you this study so that you can prepare for if something like this were to happen. Because that the media is going to show up at your church. They're going to ask you questions. I don't know. I want to hear what you have to say. My feeling initially on this is that you should not assume that this could never happen at your church. It definitely could. Yeah. Because it's a virus, and it's not. That doesn't make it. We don't think we should make a value judgment on this church. It's not their fault. I mean, they didn't intentionally get
especially March 6th.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, half of us probably didn't even know what all the symptoms were on March 6th. So, definitely no fault here. And really, I think the point that the CDC has here is showing a few people can affect a great number of people. Right. We've all learned that to this point. Really, this study here, I don't think we're bringing you probably new information. You know this. But as Scott's saying, we just need to remember that even though, we've quote unquote flattened the curve and all these things, and we're starting to reopen things, things can still happen. So we've just got to use wisdom in how we're going to handle our reopening. And in a near future episode here, we're going to talk more on the PR side of how can we prepare to handle should something happen, both just from, what we should do. Not from a PR side, just what should we have in preparation in case something happens to move towards a reclosure if we need to, or for communicating with people. But then also on the media side, on the public relations side, some tips for you to prepare. So that's coming up on a future episode here soon.
Right. So we'll go in more detail on that. But the point we wanted to make right here today is that you should anticipate an outbreak. Not to be fear-mongering or say we don't believe that God can protect our churches or that the measures that you're putting in place aren't going to be effective. It's just back in February, AJ, you and I sat in front of these cameras and begged churches to prepare to be closed. We thought it's crazy. It may never happen, but your church might be closed for like a month, we thought. And here we are sitting, in May, and a lot of churches, most churches are still closed. Mm-hmm. And so kind of sitting here saying the same thing again, AJ, like don't think that your church is immune from having an outbreak. It definitely could. And that doesn't mean you're a bad church. Doesn't mean you didn't plan well. It's a virus. Right? And we live in a fallen world and it could happen to you. So you should prepare for the worst. And if it never happens, fantastic. But you should plan as if the worst is going to happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the present reality.
Yeah. So you'll notice in today's episode, everybody, that this is a premiere episode. So if you're watching live, this is a premiere episode. AJ and I are sitting the week before this is going live and chatting about this. But AJ is monitoring the comments. So if you've got questions about about point number 1, which is expect lower attendance. Point number 2, which is expect that some folks might not come back for a long time. And point number 3, anticipate an outbreak, plan for an outbreak. Go ahead and submit those questions, and then I might be able to hop on as well and answer some questions, and hopefully AJ will be able to answer your questions too. And if you're listening to the podcast, you can always email us your questions, leadership@malfersgroup.com. We would love to dialogue with you and answer questions for you. AJ, any thoughts or comments before we wrap this thing up?
I do want to say, hey, good job for those of you that really have been working hard on this. I know we've been having these conversations, and we're monitoring Facebook feeds from a lot of groups and just watching things unfold. and there's so much care happening
Yeah.
in your church, and we just really appreciate that, and your people appreciate that, and I know it's hard, so keep it up. A lot of you are losing sleep over this stuff. When should we reopen? How should we reopen? And so keep at it. I mean, keep fighting the good fight. Lean on each other. Utilize your leadership teams, to the greatest extent that you can to prayerfully and wisely consider what is right for your church. It's great to ask questions about what other people are doing and get some ideas. But ultimately, every church is different, and across the country you're in different situations. So don't hang your hat on any one thing. Something that I said, Scott said, or anybody else that you see online. Make the ultimate decision for your church. But keep it up. Keep it up. We're in your corner. We're with you, and we're happy to to dialogue with you, as Scott said, on any of these issues. Try to help you make a great decision. But ultimately, our prayer is that the Lord will bless you and keep you and all of your congregations safe. So keep it up. We'll be looking forward to speaking with you again next week with a new topic again. As Scott said, you can email us at leadership@malfersgroup.com. You can visit malfersgroup.com for other information about us working with your church in any capacity that we specialize in. And show notes for this are on malfersgroup.com/41, the number 41.
Yep.
And thanks for joining us. Looking forward to having you back next week.
That's right. Yeah, we'll have all the links to the studies that we mentioned are in the show notes. So go to malfersgroup.com/41, check that out, and we will see you next week.